uh, using those kind words. And I see you inspiring because you're always consistently following up such kind of research, seminars, and everything. And when you started this 23 objective GCM, I was surprised at how long it would take and how much pain it takes to make it happen. So thanks a lot. Yeah, welcome all. So I'm Raji. I'm based in Kerala. I worked for some 12 years in Gulf, almost 12 years in Arab Gulf, and now I work for different news organizations. I write for Reuters, Caravan, and I recently finished a book for Penguin that's about migrant workers in undocumented migrant workers in the Arab Gulf, and they have started editing it, and the editor is very much impressed with the draft which I had sent. So this week I feel quite relaxed and relieved because uh, Penguin is a big publisher and they have agreed and they have appreciated my work. So I feel really happy. It's stories about untold and unheard stories about Indian migrant workers, undocumented Indian migrant workers in the Arab Gulf, how they got trapped in the kafala, how they struggled to survive, and how they returned back empty handed, and how they were unwelcome when they returned back empty handed. So it's about eight real life characters who are still alive in different parts of Kerala. But I have changed the names and all, and I have taken the permission from them to do their stories and all. As they are very close to me and they trust me, they have given me full freedom to write about them. So back to the topic, and before that, please feel free to interrupt me, ask stories if you have. I'll be keep on talking because I'm a talkative person, and so please feel free to stop me when you don't understand and if you don't get any point.
I'll just
So
Regiman, you'll enjoy his talk anyway, but you don't carry, just carried away. You interrupt him. Otherwise,
yeah,
you not get, what you want.
yeah.
Uh,
So the so I did my master's in applied physics, and that too applied physics. I studied material science, and I should have got a job in BARC or ISRO or VSSC or somewhere or in any atomic research center. But luckily or unluckily, I didn't clear any interviews which I went for ISRO or VSSC. I was able to clear the written examination, but I was not able to clear the interviews. Then I moved on to prepare for civil service examination. Third attempt, I cleared the prelims, but I couldn't clear the main. But by then I was 24. By then I was 24. But I used to read and write a lot, and I used to send letters to India Today. And a few of the letters would get printed in bold letters, which you might have noticed some letters are special and they get printed in bold letters. So once in a while, one letter gets printed in bold, then it's an inspiration. Again, I will keep on sending them letters. So that was my first introduction to journalism or writing something. I used to read a lot. My father used to subscribe Frontline and India Today long back, and I still have those copies with me, which have cover pages of Jayalalitha's shoes, which was raided, Rajiv Gandhi's assassination, Prabhakaran's picture, everything. I still have those. You might not have seen those copies because those were rough paper, not a glossy paper, and it was a big magazine also. It had some 90 pages. Nowadays it comes out in 30 pages or something like that. So then I thought that I have to survey, so I will do some journalism also. I went for an evening journalism course in Trivandrum. I studied there and I was doing my civil service preparation also. Finally, I didn't get civil service main, so then I moved into journalism. I migrated to Bangalore in search of a job. I got a job there in Indian Express, and from there I migrated to Gulf country when my senior migrated to Gulf country, and I had just 2 years experience with the new Indian Express, and moved to Gulf because I wanted to see the Arab country. I have seen them only in TV. I have seen them only in movies. So I wanted to see an Arab country. So I went there, and the first 2 years it was a real struggle for me because I didn't know the difference between Sunni and Shia. I didn't know the difference between Ibadi, Arab Muslim, Islam. I didn't know the sensitivity, halal, haram, anything. Even you may be wondered to know that when a Reuters copy comes and says that Palestinian terrorists from Gaza fired missiles into Israel, Tel Aviv, we have to re-edit the copy and put it that Palestinian fighters put up a resistance. That kind of sensitivity they had in the Arab countries. They don't call a terrorist as a terrorist, they call them as a fighter, even if he's carrying a Stinger missile on his shoulder. And we never, only we might have seen in our invitation letters that Honorable Judge or His Highness President or His Excellency President or Honorable Prime Minister here in India, only in official invitation letters. But in Arab country, you take any newspaper, if you're going to address an Arab minister or an Arab sheikh, you have to tell that His Excellency, His Highness, His Majesty, Her Highness, the rank differs. So for 2 years, I struggled a lot to understand these things. I was in the dust. I was just a sub-editor. But the thing was that I was getting a good pay. In Indian Express, I was getting only 16,000, but I was getting around 48,000 when it is converted to Indian rupees. So I was getting some 48,000. And there was no expense because the stay accommodation was free and food was there. It was free from the mess and from the afternoon and dinner. So I could save some money, and for a fresher like me, for who is starting the career, 48,000 was a big money for me. And I was bachelor, so I had a lot of money with me and used to spend a lot. And then from there, I moved to a bigger newspaper after working for 3 years in a small newspaper. I moved to a bigger newspaper, and then in between, I started to do some feature stories for a tabloid which was coming out for this newspaper every Friday. Some soft stories about special Arab women who drive super bikes, special Arab women who are jockeys, horse jockeys, who win races, who play piano, those kind of soft stories and all. I never used to touch, or nobody used to talk about migrant stories. Of course, I would see migrant workers walking on the road. Uh, they might be very gloomy, seeing very gloomy. They might be taking rest under the trees. I see them, but never it went into my mind that those people are being exploited and all. But slowly, the Kerala community, Keralites, wherever they go, they come together, they do their own activities, especially the political activities. To be frank, in any Gulf country, if you go, there will be different political branches. Congress Keralites will be having their own Congress committee. Communist Keralites will be having their own communist committee. And the BJP RSS also will be having their own committee. And they may not be openly talking about communism or Congress or India politics or Sangh politics in the Gulf country. They will be known under any cultural organization name called Kairali, Keli, OICC, those kind of names. But definitely in the closed door meeting, they are talking about Indian politics. They are raising funds for Indian politicians and they are raising funds for Indian parties. That's what they basically do. To be frank, the Congress politicians or the Congress workers there, they don't go into any camp. They don't take up any workers' issue. They don't interfere into any workers' issue frequently or most often. Of course, they do once in a while. But as communist people are known as a workers' first party and all, they always get involved into workers' issue. And there will be definitely one leader there also who is there staying in that country for 30 years or 25 years, who has seen the growth of that country, who has seen the migrant wars of that country, who have seen the migration, what is happening in that country. So I was a leftist. I'm a leftist. Now I don't belong to any party, but I stand for workers' rights and migrant rights because I can't adjust with the party politics either there or here. I feel sad, but I distance myself from them, and I definitely stand up for workers' rights. So if I stand up for workers' rights, I can join with Congress also, and but I can join more with communist people. So there was two, three people there in Gulf, in Oman, who are seen like big comrades who always used to talk about migrant workers issue and all. They became close to me, and I started to follow them. And I started to go with them, work with them, and all. Every third Friday, there is an open house in every Indian embassy. Open house is a house in the Indian embassy. They open the door. That is the thing. They open the door. Any worker can step in. He can put up his complaint in front of the ambassador. The ambassador will be having an interpreter. Ambassador will be having the voluntary lawyer team. Ambassador will be having a psychologist also. So ambassador will listen to the issue. He will hand over the issue to his officers, and the officers will follow up the issue seriously. It is not that the embassy workers cannot go every day and lodge a complaint. They can do it anytime. The embassy would be open for 8 hours. But on this day, it is a special day that the worker can directly talk to the ambassador. So that issue gets that gravity and it becomes clear. So every third Friday, the Congress people, the communist people, even the BJP people, even the Muslim League people, the leaders, community leaders, who used to bring in the workers and take them to the embassies. So I used to join with these politicians and I used to start to understand what is happening there. I was a note taker for these politicians there. After the worker updates a complaint to the ambassador, the ambassador would say, "Hey, write a complaint and give me." So the community leader who comes there won't be that much fluent or won't be an expert in writing and complaint in English. So he would take help of me. Hey, Raji, could you write that complaint? The worker would talk to me in Hindi or English, Malayalam or Tamil. I understand these three languages. So it was very easy for me. So I used to write the complaint and give it to them, and they will give it to the ambassador. So that's how I started to interact with the workers. And it was the third year after my arrival in Oman. After that, I slowly started to get into touch with the workers. I started to go to the camp. I started to sit with them, sleep with them, eat with them, drink with them, hear their stories. I used to visit almost all the camps and all. When I moved to the big newspaper, which is the oldest newspaper in the Arab Gulf, which is 48 years old English newspaper, the chairman called and told me that, see, you are an Indian and my subscribers are Indians. 80% of my newspaper subscribers are Indians. I want you to do Indian stories, but you should understand the sensitivity. You should know all the limits and everything. I said, yeah, fine, I will do that. I started to do small stories which were given by the community leaders or which I find from by going to the camp. So it was all like sort of, we call it as begging bowl story. The begging bowl story means, okay, I'm a standard worker. I worked there for 2 years. I didn't get my salary for 6 months. Then I'm hungry. I'm not able to send money home. So my children are studying. They're not able to pay the fee. So I will take a picture of him and say that, okay, he came here. He's struggling now. He want to go back. He's sick. His family is struggling. So some there would be in Gulf. What is that? There are always a good number of good Samaritans. They always come forward to help the stranded worker when they read a news about the stranded worker. They will come forward and then they will raise some funds, give the worker a free ticket back home, and those things and all happen. So I started to do the begging bowl story. When I started to do this begging bowl story in 2012 and something, I migrated in 2007, and by 2011 or something, I started to do the migration story. There is an charity wing in the Indian Embassy which is being led by women who always get more involved in the workers' issues. And they started to collect my stories and they started to tell me stories and I started to write more stories. And when MSA organized a meeting in Muscat, it was not directly through MSA, but it was through the charity wing. They wanted me to open a open a talk with a paper presentation about health and migrants. So I had an interesting story at that time. I just brief that story, small story. If a worker is sick, if there are 100 workers in a camp, according to the labor law, there should be a clinic inside the camp. The clinic can have only, it is not necessary that there is a doctor needed. A clinic can have a nurse, that is okay. If there are 500 workers, then the clinic should have a doctor also. But most of the camps, they don't have, even if there are 2,000 workers, they won't be having doctors. There would be only a nurse. And what is the job of the nurse? She has to check the worker's health status and then forward the patient's format to a hospital with which the company has a tie-up. And interestingly, they have a back to door tie-up also. What it is that the worker might be sick, but whether he is eligible for a sick leave or not depends on the color of the signature put by the nurse. If it is red, then the doctor who checks his patient in the outside hospital can give him a sick leave. If it is green, no sick leave. Even if the worker is sick, no sick leave. So the company has made a sort of that kind of arrangement. Even if the worker is going to die, if there is a project to be completed, and if the worker has to be put on duty, the nurse will be told that you don't have to sign in red, you just sign in with your green pen. And with this green pen signature format, the worker goes out to the hospital and the doctor will say, oh no, you are okay, you can go forward, no issue. So this was told to me by a doctor. I can't print that story there because it is very sensitive. I will be thrown out very soon. And I didn't have that courage to print that story. And I didn't have the skill to do that story in 2011. If it is now, then I would have done it in a proper way. In 2011, I was very new. I didn't have that skill. So I said, I didn't do that story. But in that MFA meeting, when I said this thing in the opening paper about migrant worker and health access, everybody was shocked to learn that thing. So that impressed MFA. MFA took me to train me in diplomacy training program, which was provided by University of New South Wales in Sydney. Then they started to take me to many migration meetings in regional global levels in Amman, Jordan, Lebanon, Geneva, many places, Kathmandu, Colombo, many places, Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur and all. So slowly, when I started to understand the violation, when I started to understand what is migration in a proper way, when I started to understand what are the UN tools which I can use in reporting stories, then I started to see more and more stories. We all know that ILO Convention 29 says that forced, forced labor. If a worker's travel document is being seized by the employer, then that is a strong indication of uh, restriction of movement, and that would lead to forced labor. In Gulf countries, every worker has to submit his passport to the employer, and he will give it back only when the worker is allowed to go by the employer. So we all see that as a new norm, that as a normal thing. But when I went to ILO training and all, oh, that is forced labor. What is forced labor? Then this is forced labor. This is modern day slavery. So by understanding those issues with the help of MFA, ILO, UNFW, and other meetings, I started to understand more bigger picture about migration. And then then I stopped doing begging bowl stories. Then I started to do stories which could bring in policy changes. Meanwhile, I got an editor who came from New York Times to our newspaper. He was a very senior journalist. He was impressed with my stories and he said that you have to refine more, you have to rework more and all. He told me a story should have truth. It's not that just truth. It was an acronym what he meant. Truth means T for topical, R for relevant, U for unusual, T for tension, H for human voice. Topical means you can tell a story about Kerala in Kerala or at maximum in India. Nobody will read that story if you print it in Tokyo, Japan. So it should be topical. And you cannot do the same thing. A topical Tokyo local story cannot be printed here, and nobody will read that in Kerala. So that is the topical thing. Relevant. It should be relevant according to the time. If you see, when there are Dalit abuse cases, you may be seeing that many Dalit abuse cases will be reported repeatedly from different corners of the country. Why? Because it is very relevant at that time. At that time. So we say that it's a chain of stories. So it's relevant. Unusual. That's a symbol every journalist would know. If a dog bites a man, that's usual thing. But if a man bites a dog, that's an unusual thing. Then that definitely becomes a story. Then there is a tension. That is a truth, T-R-U-T. That's the second T, that is tension. Tension means there should be two sides always. Either employer and the worker, government. There should be two sides, A and B fighting each other. It's not that they are literally fighting, is that fighting each other. There should be some difference. So the Rahul Gandhi is saying something, Modi is opposing something. Then there is a tension, and if there is a tension, then definitely there is a story. The last one is the most important thing, H. H means human voice. That should be there in a story. If you are going to tell a story about potato price drop, then you should talk about potato farmers, how they are they on the verge of committing suicide, how much financially broken they are, what is the uncertainty they are facing. If you don't have a quote from a potato farmer, just saying that today in this market, potato price is this much, and yesterday it was this much, and today it is a dip of 20%. Nobody is going to read a story. People like to read people talking. So people like to read the quotes from people. They want to know what that victim said. They want to know what that winner said. They want to know what that fighter said. So that is what human voice. So when we say human voice, and when we come back to migration, we all know that there are 250 million external migrants all over the world. 250 million. And there are 750 million internal migrants all over the world. Internal migrants means we saw that internal migrants walking back home when the COVID lockdown was announced in India. So we know that there are a lot of internal migrants. And the biggest country which is having internal migrants is China, because from the rural China, people move to urban China and they work in Shanghai and big cities. And that's how they exploit the people, and that's how we get the cheaper price. And even in Africa, those who are not able to leave Africa, they migrate from south to north. We always say that migration happens from south to north. People from south want to move to north, which is a richer country. See, they want to cross Africa, Mediterranean, go to Europe, Italy, Europe, they want to go. Even from UP, Bihar, or Tamil Nadu, or Chennai, or wherever it is, they want to come to Delhi. Or from South America, from Latin America, from the poverty-stricken countries, they all want to go to the land of opportunity, which is North America. So there are 750 million internal migrants. Now, if we club together them, they are 1 billion. What is the total population of the world? It is 7 billion. So out of 7 billion, 1 billion is migrants. And when we say that, if we take that proportion down to the paper, out of seven people, one person you meet is a migrant. You just step out from your home or your office. Out of 7 people, a person you see is a migrant. He's everywhere, either as a domestic worker, as a gardener, driver, clerk, accountant. He's everywhere. He may be an internal migrant, he may be an external migrant. So when we are going to tell a story, If you want to tell a story about a human with a human voice, and if you want to tell a story about tell a story which people want to read, then there are plenty of stories outside, and especially about migrants. And why? What is the need to tell the story of migrants? See, the definition. There are different definitions. Migrant is a person who leaves his home or his home country to another country in search of a job, and he will return back to his home country periodically or sometimes permanently. That is the definition what UN gives. And there is another category called asylum seeker. Asylum seeker is a person who seeks asylum in another country due to some risk or repression in his home country or the country where he is living. Say, we can say Taslima Nasreen, the writer from Bangladesh, is an asylum seeker. And we can say Malala Yousaf from Pakistan, now in UK, is an asylum seeker. Now there are other category called refugees. Refugees are the people due to climate change or to political repression or to war or civil war or any kind of other tension in a country. He leaves his country permanently and he flees to another country, like what's happening from Syria to Turkey. People flee from Syria, they cross the Gaziantep border, and they come into Turkey and they stay. So they are called as refugees. And we have such kind of refugees called, which we may be more familiar with, is Rohingya. The Rohingya from Bangladesh fled Bangladesh because they were seen as a second-class citizen there in Bangladesh by that Bangladesh government. They were not getting proper care, welfare measures, and they were seen as a second-class citizen. So they started to flee to India and to other Southeast Asian countries and all. So that is refugee. But refugee also will be a worker one day. He cannot survive without doing any work. So he can also be seen as a migrant worker. And migrant, see, we say that those people from Africa who cross the Mediterranean Sea and enter into Sicily and they stay in the open source for 3 years and then they get half citizenship into Europe and then they move into Europe and then they get hired by traffickers or mafias and they will be, the women will be forced to work as sex workers. The men and children will be taken as apple pickers and all. At the end of the day, they are also forced to work as a worker. So migrant will be always a migrant worker. So refugees also will become a migrant worker. So there are lots of people in this world who are being exploited by this government, corporate, mafia, who reel under exploitative conditions. As I went to Gulf, I started to learn things. When I started to learn things through the UN meetings, ILO meetings, and all, I heard the word kafala first time in an ILO meeting. Then I went and I started to Google and read about kafala. Then I got MFA ILO books about kafala. Then I started to read. So kafala is a thing that they started in 1960s. There are 6 Arab Gulf countries. Why I'm talking about Arab Gulf countries? Because there are 1 crore 30 lakh, 1 crore 30 lakh Indians outside, working outside. Okay, I'm not taking about PIO, OCI, those kind of. There are 1.3 crore Indians working outside India. India is the largest migrant sending country, and India is the largest remittance receiving country also. We are receiving 90 billion US dollars. Bangladesh is getting only 15 billion US dollars. Nepal is getting only 30 billion US dollars. So we are the largest migrant receiving country, recipient country. So out of the 1.3 crore, 90 lakh Indians are working in the Arab Gulf. And out of the 90 lakh Indians, there would be only 1 lakh Indians who are having that white collar job. Even if we say the white collar job, clerk, accountant, cashier, manager, doctor, lawyer, and business people. Okay. So 89 lakh Indians in the 6 GCC countries plus Jordan and Lebanon are struggling to make both ends meet in the Arab Gulf countries under the kafala system. What is kafala system? In 1960s only, the Gulf countries started to form as a country. In 1962, there was no United Arab Emirates. They were separated as Ras Al Khaimah, Sharjah, Al Ain, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Al Quwain. So they all were six emirates and they were different emirates. And Oman was a country, Qatar was a country, Saudi was a country, and Bahrain was a country. But they all were under the control of British government, which was reported controlled by the British officer in Persia, that is in Iran, who was reporting to the British officer in Bombay. So even in 1960s, the Arab country sheikhs were reporting to British, and the British were reporting to the British residents in Bombay, Viceroy in Bombay. And after nine, and they were called as crucial states. These sheikhs and states used to fight each other. So the government, the British government said, okay, we are making peace, so you people just be calm, and we will call you crucial states. In the late 1970s, they all started to form as a country. At that time, only the oil was found in this Arab countries. And when they started to find oil, they became countries. And when they started to find oil, they wanted workers. The Arabs, they are only small numbers in every Arab country. In Qatar, the number of Qataris is just 2% or 3% of the total population. The rest are all foreigners, migrants, maybe white, Indians, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Philippines, everybody are there. So in every country it is like that. Only in Oman, the number of Arabs is 55% and 45% are migrants. So when they started to bring in workers, they were afraid whether the worker would run away with the money or something, whether the worker will work with continuously with me. So they made a contract or a legal bonding, which is not written anywhere, but it is called as kafala. That kafala means you have to work for the employer for 2 years at least, which is the validity of the 2-year job visa. And the employer, the Arab, is your owner. We can even say that he is your owner, and you are like a sort of bonded labor to this Arab employer. He will decide how many hours of work. He will decide what you should eat. He will decide when you can go home. He will decide what is your salary and everything. So this is happening in all the Arab countries. Recently, the Qatar government reformed kafala, and they wanted to bring in more changes in the working in the workers sector, because they are going to host the World Cup, FIFA World Cup. Uh, it's all because the FIFA World Cup is coming. So all the British and American companies have to come in and build this football stadium and everything. And the British and American companies, they will come only if there is no kafala. And we all know that up to a level, the European and American countries don't accept modern day slavery. Uh, International Labour Organization sees kafala as a modern day slavery. And I forgot the number, how many are there. I think so, it's 250 million or something, they say. 250 million migrant workers are trapped in modern day slavery. And many countries have, some 6 countries have not ratified the Forced Labor Convention, which was enacted in 1930. The Arab countries have signed it, but they have put some clauses saying that our Sharia, we have reservations because of our Sharia law, because everything, the final say is Sharia law. So when I started to understand this kafala system and the tools, conventions and all, then I started to see big stories happening everywhere in the Gulf country. So when a worker comes and tells me that, okay, I'm stranded for 6 months, I'm not getting a salary, I complained to the embassy, but the embassy didn't call me back. I've been repeatedly approaching them, but they are turning down my pleas. So then I know that it's a big violation. So See, we always say that the journalists always say we get stories from victims. So he's a victim, and I have a great story. A great story in the sense worker has not been paid for 6 months. It's also not permissible by Omani labor law, and it's also not permissible by international labor organization standards. So 6 months is a big violation. Then I will ask whether he has a passport. No, the passport is with the employer. Then again, it's a kafala system. Then did he complain to the employer? Yes, he complained to the employer, but the office didn't take up his complaint. Then that's again a violation. He has the right to go to the lawyer. He didn't know to go to the lawyer. So that's again there's a story. And he might be telling me that I went to the embassy. I repeatedly plead to the embassy, but the embassy didn't listen to my plea. Then that's again a big story because Indian embassies are being set up in the Arab countries to take care of the workers because we 90 lakh workers are there in the Arab countries, and out of the 90 lakh, 99% are blue collar workers who earn between 10,000 to 20,000. Don't think that if somebody goes to Gulf and he is bringing in a lot of money. Majority of the workers who go to the Gulf are there just earning between 10,000 to 20,000. Of course, there are business people who invest money and they take money and bring in money, but they don't bring in money to India. They invest again there in the Gulf countries and they expand their own business. There are from South India, there are Asad Mupan, Yusuf Ali, Revi Pulla, Chris Gopalakrishnan. They're all in the Forbes list. They're all worth of 50,000 crore and all. 50,000 crore. South Yusuf Ali's worth is 50,000 crore. He's employing some 50,000 employees. And today there is a news break that the Abu Dhabi government has invested 7,500 crore into Lulu for his expansion in Egypt. But interestingly, none of these businessmen are remitting money, and even if they are bringing in money to India, it comes through foreign direct investment. But you know the fact, I told you that 90 lakh, 90 billion, yeah, 90 billion US dollar is the remittance what India receives annually from abroad. When I say abroad, 90% comes from Gulf because out of the 1.3 crore migrant workers, Indian migrant workers, 90 lakh are there in Gulf. So the 90% of the remittance comes from Gulf. And when I say 90% of remittance comes from Gulf, 90% of that remittance also comes from migrant workers. Why? Because migrant worker who is earning between 10,000 and 20,000 there in the Gulf would only be spending 5,000 because he would be having a cab, he would be having food, he would be having his own entertainment or anything, whatever it is. So the rest of the money he will remit back through Western Union or through any other bank. And why he remits back immediately the money? Because the thing is that he might have taken a loan to get a visa to migrate to any Gulf country. In ordinary case, the agents take 60,000 or 1 lakh rupees, ranging between 60,000 to 1 lakh rupees. I always say that the first 2 years, a worker, Indian migrant worker, would be working only to pay back this loan which he took to remit, which he took to pay for the visa or to buy the visa. Then the third year only, he will start to earn something to meet some expenses at home. So he will be remitting the money. So the 90 billion US dollar means maximum amount of money is remitted by the blue collar worker, the blue collar worker. But unfortunately, the Indian government doesn't have a migration policy, doesn't have a updated migration act, and doesn't have any packages to address the migrant workers' challenges. India still manages migration with the 1983 Immigration Act. With the 1983 Immigration Act, it means that we are still managing migration of this 90 lakh migrants who are there in the Gulf countries with an act which is some 83 million, which is some 40 years old, which is some 40 years old. which is a pathetic condition because on those days, the number of Indian migrants would be just 30 lakh or something. Now it is 90 lakh. Why people migrate? Because we all might have heard in the GCM classes. It's because maybe due to industrialization, maybe due to job loss, maybe due to climate change. I even know a Indian shepherd in a Kuwaiti Iraq border desert, where I went and met him and talked to him. He migrated from Kashmir. He's from Pulwama region. He told me that if I stay back there, either I have to join either the terrorist group or I have to become an informer for Indian Army. In both cases, I would be shot dead either by the army or by the terrorists in a 2 year time. And many youngsters lose life like that. So my family told me to migrate. And he thought that he would be migrating on a domestic worker job. Domestic worker means घर का काम करने के लिए, to do the household job. But he was cheated. He was taken as a domestic worker and he was put in a desert in Iraq border, uh, alone in a desert to take care of some 300 goats. He, 300 goats, one air cooler, and the Arab employer would come once in a month, bring him some tablets, bring him some foodstuffs. Most often it would be potatoes, onions, and we call kubus, which is called Arab bread. And if he has to meet another guy in the desert, he has to walk for 1 hour where where some African shepherds are there. They are from Sudan, and he has only one Asian friend, that is a Sri Lankan shepherd in a different side of the desert. So I asked him, "Why are you staying back? Why don't you go back?" He said, "See, I'm getting little bit money. I won't be able to earn that money back home. We don't have any business there in Pulwama, and I may get shot by either by army or militant. And the situation is very bad. My mother wants me to stay alive, so I am here. Chalega yaar. I'm unmarried, so it's okay for me. I'm happy." He's not happy. He's pretending to be happy. He's convincing himself that he's happy. So that's what I even have seen, that kind of push driving, which pushes an Indian to migrate. When if I'm not talking about politics, but I have to tell the story. When Yogi Adityanath came to power in UP, and when they banned slaughtering of cows, and what happened is that the leather industry came down, fell down, and there were Muslims and Dalits who were cleaning the skin and doing the first job of with the cow skin to the leather industry. They all lost the job, and the Dalit and Muslim, they have been doing this job traditionally for years and years and for generations. They don't know any other job. And at this time, an agent comes and tells them that, hey, yeah, you have got a job in Burj Khalifa, which is 140 floors high, the tallest building. You will be getting 30,000 Indian rupees. You will have a cushy time there. Come, he will think that that is true, and he will migrate. He will not even see the Burj Khalifa. He will be put in some desert in UAE or somewhere. So uh, here all I see a story. I can write stories from Indian side. I can write stories from Gulf side. See, basically, I use an example. You just think that there is a 100-floor building which is under construction, and a worker there on a rope is painting that building without any safety pin. I can bring in some 20 stories with that one picture. If the picture is taken in June at 12 p.m. In the mid afternoon, then that's a violation, because between March, April, May, between June till August, March till June, some countries do it from March, some countries do it from April. The Arab countries say that between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. during these months, workers should not work because the temperature might go above 50 degrees Celsius. So workers who work outside under the sun, when the temperature is above 50 degrees Celsius, people will die due to exhaustion. So people should not work. So that's if they work, that's a violation. And if the picture is taken in June in June on some day at 12 p.m., then that's a violation. So that I can file a story of violation. Now, if I wait there and I see that the worker is not wearing a safety gear, then that's again a story. And when if I wait there and when he comes down and talk to him, he may say, if I ask him why you didn't take the safety gear, he will have a different story to tell. Once I did a story like that. He said that the employer told me that the safety gear is not for free. If you have to have a safety gear, I have to pay him. I have to adjust for certain amount cut from my monthly salary. I'm getting only $100, and if the employer is going to take $20 every month for using the safety gear, then why should I lose that money? So I'm ready to take the risk to paint this 100-story building without any safety gear. And what happens then? If he falls down, then you cannot claim an insurance because the employer will tell a lie that no, 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 I was providing him safety gear. He didn't take it. I don't know. And if the worker is falling down and if he suffers some injury and if he's not having a safety gear, then that is a fault of the worker. Then again, we have a story. And why you are not taking the safety gear, why you don't want to pay 20 real, $20 to the work employer? He will say, hey, I paid to the agent 1 lakh rupee to come to Gulf. Then again, that is the story because if he has come back after 2015, Sushma Swaraj, when she became the Ministry of External Affairs, she brought an e-migrate system, which insists that the worker should migrate with the knowledge of government of India only. You should not pay any single penny to an agent. And you should migrate only through registered agent. And you should pay only 30% to the agent. And this worker is telling me that I paid 1 lakh, then that's a big story for me. Then I can say that, okay, see, this is happening even when there is a. Then you talk to the trade unionists, you talk to the workers, you can file RPAs, you can file RPAs with Indian embassies, everything can be done online. I do file a lot of RPAs on and off with the Minister of External Affairs and all. I get a lot of data, I collect it and I keep it with me. Sometimes I do stories, sometimes I don't do stories. I take it for some other research work and all. As I started in the beginning, when we start talk to people, when they start to tell their stories, and when we start to write the stories, and when those stories get printed, people will definitely read because people want to read people's stories. We as a journalist, our job is to be a messenger, not to take any side, be impartial. Uh, Sometimes they say that always I take a blame that I'm an activist come journalist and I always jump the line, the thin red line. I cross the thin red line, but I don't mind. Sometimes I become activist, sometimes I become journalist. But talking to people, see, once Sashi Tharoor told me that Ravi, reading, writing, and meeting maketh a man. He told me. So reading makes you to write and writing again and again, again and again, you get opportunity to attend for meetings, webinars, seminars, talk to people and all. So you get exposed, you get good, you get chances to meet good people, learn from them and all. You learn more about your own interested topic. When I started to read more about migration, I started to write about migration. When I started to write more about migration, MSA noticed me and they took me into their fold and they trained me well on migration. And still I am learning and still I'm doing research work. Today also I got a call from MSA asking me about, I have to check about cases which is happening in Qatar because Qatar has brought out some changes which is pro-worker, worker-friendly. And MSA wants to know whether those changes are good on the ground, whether the worker is getting benefited or not. So MSA just made a call and told me, I said, okay, it's fine. They are confident with me because I read and write about Qatar and I am updated about the Qatar. And as I read and write, people come to me and tell their stories. So I have some contacts in Qatar. I can talk to them and I get an update. As I read and write about migration, I got a great story last 2 weeks ago. It was about hellish-like conditions in a Saudi deportation center, where in a room for 80, 250 people were put in with limited food, and people were even sleeping inside and in front of the washroom. The people who were taken into custody 4 months ago were forced to wear the same dress till they were returning back home. They were not even given medicine. Either you have cancer or diabetic, you get only paracetamol. And that's true. They throw it inside the cell. And if you get it, you get it. Otherwise, you get beaten up with iron rod. You can't ask any questions. And if you have fever or something, you will be taken out and made to stand under the sun. And if you resist to eat food, you will be taken to outside and you will be made to stand there for 24 hours under the Saudi sun. You will fall down and then you will feel exhausted, dehydrated, and you will be needing water and food. And then you won't resist and you will eat food and water. So this story came to me from the deportation center, and a day before they were leaving, they shot a video. They came here, they landed, and they found my number on Facebook. They called me, they told me the story, everything on record. How they know me? I used to go to TV debates when the COVID outbreak was happening in the Arab Gulf countries. From March till June, July, August, I did some 60 stories about Indian migrants. So I was also invited to many TV debates in prime time Kerala channel. So people there listen come to know that okay, somebody is talking on behalf of us. So they trust me. So they talk to me. They bring stories to me. How that happened? I talk to them. I am compassionate with them. I I listen to them. As a journalist, you have to listen to them. It's the same modest thing. If you are going to do a crime beat, you want to be a good crime reporter, you have to talk to the gangsters. You should start from pickpocketing guys, and then you may be talking to the gangsters. Then you may be having police officers as sources, IB, intelligence, NIA, everybody. The same thing I developed in migration. Uh, Interestingly, there are no much people who talk about migration, who understand about migration, who read about migration, who write about migration, who stand for the migrants. But as I said in the starting, out of the 7 people you meet outside, one is a migrant. And what is a migrant going through? He is always exploited. Most of the migrants are exploited, 99%. And he will definitely have a story to tell. And that story will be having a genuine case to tell. And that genuine case may push the government to bring in some policy changes. We are just storytellers, messengers. Our job is to tell them that, okay, boss, this is happening on the ground. You people fix it. Sadhu sir, I think so. I took a
Thank you,
long time.
thank you. I tell you, it is such a hypnotic talk, and I gave message to people. Manjima I gave at 7:24, and Abhishek I gave 7:53. They have not seen the message. They're all listening you know, 40 minutes. They have not seen the message. So it's very important. In fact, three skills if you develop: reading, writing, and meeting, which will
Yes.
come actually. Each is related. It's such a simple way Reggie has told from Shashi Tharoor, who is also a very successful international person. And this is a very important. In fact, this platform you can use. You meet today Regimon, who has achieved a lot in journalism and who is actually living that kind of inspiration. He left the bigger lucrative job and career, and he got this calling to become a journalist. And you see how he is picking the story also important. So you read, you write, meet people, and everybody with the skill you develop, everything becomes story. Everybody will have something to say to you. So now, can we have one or two questions if they ask?
Sure, sir.
Okay, okay. So any of you want to ask? See, this is an interactive session. Feel free. He's like you can say your mentor. You can say he's such a nice person. You know, when I requested, he immediately said yes. And you are young people. You should also take inspiration, not just inspiration, skill. What he gave, reading, writing, meeting. Such a simple way he explained. Anybody want to ask anything? Srija, Manjima, and I think some of you, please, you are editor, you have more responsibility now. Srija,
Hello.
if you want to ask anything to Rejman.
I think it was comprehensive enough. And just one thing I need to know is that when we are writing any news report, there are kind of many arguments, counter arguments, and also kind of what to say. There are articles written also on that, like a piece of information that we get, suppose on the mic on the kafala system, and then there is some articles written on that, some first person narrative, and also some counter arguments to this. So how do we construct a report? Like, we know a specific topic is there, and there are many things that are catering to it. So in order to write a comprehensive report, is it like it is not article that we are writing, it is a kind of a news report. So what is the significance of a news report, or what are the key elements that the news report should contain, apart from the first person narrative and the arguments that are in congruence with the theme that we have chosen? Are we supposed to also deal with our own perceptions or something like kind of that obviously comes up? We obviously come up with our own ideas. So is it kind of okay to write it in the news reports?
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for the question. Yeah. So the basic thing is that you wanted to do a story about kafala system. So that's the thing. Am I clear?
Yes,
Srija,
Yes,
am I?
that can be an example.
Okay, fine. Now, see, nobody is going to read a story about kafala system if you are going to write it as a, like an academic research paper. So people all know kafala. Okay, even if people don't know, so they are least bothered about kafala, because people who are reading the newspaper or people who are researching about kafala are not the victims of kafala. And the real victims of kafala even won't understand that I am a victim of kafala. So there is no big deal or big thing in writing about, okay, it started in 1960, it is a modern day slavery, ILO has denounced that, blah, 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 nothing. Nobody is going to do. But if you want to do a kafala story tomorrow based or focused in the Arab Gulf, I have an answer. See, in 2019, Qatar said that they have reformed kafala. And in 2021, 20, from January 1, they said that there is no kafala. Now we are going to end 2020. We are in October. So during the last 8 months, I agree there was COVID. But during the last 8 months, just talk to 5 workers in Qatar and ask them, how did you feel? Was there freedom of movement restrictions? Was your passport seized? Was your salary not given on time? Were you allowed to go back to India whenever you asked? Or when the so when you ask these 4 questions, if they say that no, the same thing when it was there in 2018 and 17, they are continuing the same thing still now, then we have a great story to tell the world that even after 2020 January 1, reforming kafala on the ground, workers say that they have not experienced anything. So that's one thing. And another thing, we can bring it a little more compact story. From March, there was COVID. I agree that the companies were under pressure, but they have laid off. They saw the workers as a liability, and they laid off thousands of migrant workers, and they packed them in chartered flights, Vande Bharat mission, and company flights, and they send them back to India. Now, if they have reformed kafala, the worker who is leaving the company should have got all the end of service benefits, all his pending salary and everything. But I will tell you that 90% of the workers didn't get any end of service benefits or any pending salary who came back during the COVID, who were forced to leave the country during the COVID. All the companies took this COVID as a benefit to not to give the salary and the end of service benefit. So then what is the difference of they claiming that they have reformed the kafala? Now, we have this thing in mind. We have quote from 5 workers. We should try for a quote from the Qatar government saying that, okay, I talked to so and so worker, and they are saying that they experience these things. But you people have announced officially that on January 1, 2020, that Qatar has removed kafala. And you people have said that all the wages will be cleared, all workers' rights will be respected. But I have got quotes that workers' rights have not been respected. Do you people have something to say? The government may respond, may not respond. But we have to follow the protocol for the safety of ours and for the dignity of our publisher, that we should have the other side of the story. Otherwise, what happens in the Arab countries that they are very fond of suing journalists. They will just sue us in a court for $1 million and all. And we will be working for a small website organization which is paying us 50,000 rupees, and there would be only 10 employees. And this, when this notice comes here through an international court, we will not be able to handle that situation. So if we get the Qatar government comment, then the 5 workers comment, and we can have a 200-word backup with proper hyperlink of the news items which they announced officially about the reform and about the removal of kafala. So it's closed. You can just even put a headline that even after 8 months of removal of kafala, workers who talk to us claim that abuses continue. Rights are not respected. We can even talk to the Ministry of External Affairs, because the Indian government always praises Qatar government for reforming kafala. We can ask them and tell them, see, we talk to workers and they're saying that the workers' rights are not respected. Or aren't you people not intervening? And there is another way also. You can file an RTA to the Qatar Indian Embassy and ask them between January 1 and October, how many labor complaints have been registered and what are the classifications. They will definitely give you a reply. And they will say that passport fees are 60%, non-payment of wages 40%, not allowing to go back home 30%. So these are all not respecting workers' rights. Removal of kafala means you have to respect workers' rights. And we have a data backup also officially. And we can do a beautiful story. We can do at least 2-3 stories from that if you think about it. Am I clear?
Yes, yes, very. Shrija, you got your answer?
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
I think Snehal or Manjima both want to ask quickly, short question to ask. Okay?
Okay, may I go first?
Yes.
Okay, before I shoot the question, I have to thank Reggie sir for this very enriching session. It was like reading a really good book. Like you spanned this narrative across different countries and different time periods, and it felt so real because it was a personal experience. You were narrating it out of your first-hand personal experience, so it felt very real to me. And it was also very informative. Now back to the question. This is more of a general question related to journalism that I had in my mind. We often tend to get very repetitive about our stories, like about the migrant workers, or even be it about sexual assault cases or Dalit crimes against Dalits and other minorities. So the stories tend to get repetitive, and it gets repetitive because the crimes are never stopping. People are never getting justice. But then this also competes with journalism is also about competing with the reader's time, right? We need people to focus on our stories and understand its importance. And especially in a time like this, when there is a wide variety of content available, how do we ensure that we have people's attention despite the story getting a bit repetitive? So I had this question.
I think together, Reggie will take 2-3 questions. It will save your time.
Yes.
So I think Megha want to ask something.
So, thank you for the session, first of all. And I just wanted to ask you, like, I have also been in Oman for about 12 years right now, and we just migrated back to Bangalore recently. So I know the country has a lot of censorship, especially regarding its government. So I wanted to know, like, being a journalist, and especially when you're writing stories about the first-hand experiences the migrants face, what was the risks and challenges that you faced, like, while writing these stories, and even after coming back to India, how did you manage?
Yes. Any more
Anyone?
questions?
I think Snehal, we want to ask something. Okay, then this is final. We'll not come back again. Afterwards, you can interact personally because 1 hour is spent and
No problem, sir.
okay,
No problem. Yeah.
okay.
So the one first question is to tell that
Mahima,
how to make a story look fresh and get the attention of readers. Uh, I've been doing migration stories since 2011. Now it's 2021, 10 years. Yeah, it's going to be 21 years, 10 years. In Oman, Times of Oman newspaper, I printed 2,500 migrant stories on front pages or inside pages altogether. I have a big two cartons here I brought from there. I couriered them paying 15,000 Indian rupees to just send my stories back home because I can't bring that weight through the aircraft. So I had to courier them. I spent 15,000 Indian rupees to bring my stories back. That's a big challenge to tell a story in a different angle. That's one big challenge every journalist will face. But the thing is that if you understand, that's what I say, if you understand the topic more and more and more, then you will find fresh angles in that story. Uh, I, I was while I was doing the COVID stories, I sent it to you, sir. There are some 50 to 60 stories there. So I was talking to the migrant workers, and nobody realized that migrant workers are under stress during the COVID. How I realized that is that I got a case that a migrant worker, there were two people, Carolite, one got tested positive, and the other one in the room, when he came to know that the other one is positive, he just jumped from the building and committed suicide. And this guy's testing also was done, and he was negative also. The next day, his result came, he was negative. But due to mental stress and the scare, he jumped from the building and committed suicide. So I started to collect news items which comes in Malayalam newspapers during the COVID. Okay, one died, one committed, one committed, one committed. Then I realized that, okay, so COVID is inducing mental stress also for the migrant workers. What are the issues which induce the mental stress for migrant workers? Non-payment, uncertainty, no shelter, no food, no medicine, no care from Indian embassy, no idea when Vande Bharat mission is going to start operation. COVID outbreak happened in March 20 in Gulf countries. They all started to go into lockdown in March 20. And when did we start the Vande Bharat mission? May 7. March, April, May. So more than 60 days, 75 days, the people, blue collar workers were stranded on. So, well, I'm going to tell the rights violation story. I don't want to talk about always the ILO convention and all. And people won't read that also. If you start a story with ILO convention, people are, I'm isko padega. Why should I read this? And it's very, very dull also. So I started to think about it. I talked to William. William said, hey, people are under mental stress. So that rang in my mind for mental stress. So then I started to talk to psychologists, workers, and all. Then I started to collect the data of suicides and all. Then I started to talk to the workers there in the camp and all. Yes, people are under, migrant workers are under mental stress. And what are the reasons? Non-payment of salary, no medicine, no isolation, no proper shelter, no proper food, then uncertainty going back home. So that was a big story. So, and in February 24, on February 24, I was there in Dubai. I came back 25th, And March, we went into lockdown. I came back and I went voluntarily here into isolation. I know the camps in Gulf. In a small room, there would be 10 people. The washrooms will be dirty. So the first story I wrote on COVID is that if COVID is going to have an outbreak in the Gulf country, then that is going to be the biggest risk. And now we know that some 1,000 Indians have died in the Gulf country. So due to COVID. So finding a different angle, how do I find a different angle? I have to understand this. I have to keep on talking to the people. Barkha that traveled along with migrant workers for her Mojo journalism, for her TV Mojo channel, YouTube channel, and she did a great story. And I am damn sure next time, if such a kind of crisis happens, she will do better stories because this time she might have learned her shortfalls. She has talked to the workers. She is now a sort of expert in internal migrants. She has traveled along with workers. So you should be with your story, get glued into the story, talk to the workers more, talk to the experts more. Sometimes it is experts who bring in stories. Sometimes, most of the times, experts, because they know that we keep on following the migration again and again and again. So they may give us for a story. So reading and writing and talking to people about your choice of topic, and that's it. Risk and challenges in Oman. It was a big risk. I got arrested thrice. I got jailed twice. I was kept in police station twice for 24 hours. And finally, I got deported for exposing South Asian women domestic workers trafficking through Sohar, Oman, UAE border. And they were very bad with me, but I was not ready to budge. There was a doctor here in India, in Kerala. When I started journalism, I did my first story about him. He worked in a tribal area. He was a rank holder from government medical college, but he wanted to work in a tribal area. He worked in a tribal area. He died very young age, at the age of 36. And when he died, the tribals came and did pujas for his cremation. And they had very high respect for him. And there was a tribal community leader there who told me that story. I did that story, and it was my first printed story in the New Indian Express. It was a front page anchor. And when that story got published, the next day morning, every TV channel called me and asked me about the doctor, and they all ran that story. And the doctor, after the death, the doctor became a sort of role model for everybody. And that made me to think a lot. He, being a doctor, a rank holder, could have migrated to America and earned a lot of money. But he went to the tribal area and he worked for the welfare of the people there who are less fortunate. As a doctor, he can do that. So as a journalist, what should I do? Okay, I will do corporate stories also, but it is 10% what my media wants. But the 90%, I will be committed to tell the stories which are being untold by others. It's not that I'm going to expose big crime network, bad this and all. I don't have the skill to expose a crime network and all. I'm not trained for that. I don't know that. I'm illiterate about it. But I know to tell migrant workers stories. And I always believe that it's my responsibility as a journalist to tell the stories of those people who are unheard anywhere. In India, we print only migration stories twice. One is that when World Bank comes up with a remittance data saying that India got this much of remittance. So that's the story for Economic Times and Hindu. That's it. And another time is that some company will be laying off 1,000 workers in some Arab country, then we will do a migrant story. 1,000 workers laid off, that is 3-column story or 2-column story. But when I started to do stories, I'm telling stories again and again and again about myself. Why? Because I want policymakers, people who can bring in changes to hear this story, listen to this story, read this story, and bring in some changes for the migrant workers' welfare. End of the day, what am I going to do? I want to be known as a good journalist who stood for the workers' side, who wrote about workers. That's it. I don't need any big awards or anything. I need to be known as a journalist who wrote workers' stories. That's enough. That makes me happy because I I saw that doctor's cremation, the respect what the tribals gave, and that was inspiring for me. Thanks, Sadhu sir.
Thank you. And really, we don't have words because it's such a human aspect you brought here. That is what we want to learn from you. Right now, I request Snehal, are you there? We have already see this relationship will continue with Regimon. We are all linked now. Okay, over to you, Snehal. You give a vote of thanks.
Yes, yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So, thank you, sir, for being with us and giving your precious time, especially when we like our team has been from a different backgrounds, and your journey has been of similar kind. Like as you said, Barak and all those things, and then entering journalism. So it is kind of very inspiring for us because we all come from different backgrounds and have a little knowledge of journalism and how to write a good report. And you being a journalist and your life at that same time has posed a very valuable insights how to write a perfect and an empathetic story, especially empathetic because if the story is not read, then there is no use. And throughout your talk, I got one thing that to be a journalist, it is very important to be an activist. Then only you can be a real journalist. So thank you so much for such a valuable time. And I'm sure that whatever you have said, especially the formulas of the truth, that was something really new for me. TRUTH, and also the reading and writing principle that will definitely help us in our future projects or assignments, whichever we will be getting. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
Sadhu
you.
sir.
Thank
Sadhu
you,
sir,
Snehal. Thank you, everybody. And we got a very good evening, very good evening today. So thank you, Regimon.
Sadhu sir, 1 minute.
To add
One,
Yes,
just one
yes,
second.
please.
Sir, I have that ILO's toolkit of